Some say it started in 1939 when a mysterious fire killed 2 people. Some say it started in the years after the fire, the years of a childhood stolen, and innocence lost. Some might say it didn't start till much later, in the fall of 1961. But everyone will agree that whenever it started, the end came with a sudden brutality and a family left looking for answers. Answers that, even today, have never been found. All that remains are black and white pictures of a bloody kitchen, children that never knew their mother, and many, many questions. Today we explore the strange disappearance of Joan Risch. So, Joan Risch, I tell you, I've been fascinated by true crime for a while, and I know a lot of the big ones, and this was your suggestion. You wanted to do this as our first episode, and I thought, well, okay, I don't know about it. It gives me something to do, and turned out to be one of the most fascinating cases I've ever run across. As far as a mystery goes, it's a 60-year-old mystery that, spoiler alert, has never been solved.
And it was just, one of those nights I was on, listened to something probably and was looking at missing persons, and then clicked on a link and came across this case and got to reading it, and it's just always stuck with me. And I guess there's a lot of cases that stuck with me, but for this one, whenever anybody's like, what's a case, that you would love solved? I'm like, Joan Risch, yeah. It is so interesting, what happened when people just go, and they disappear like that, and you just, it's like, what happened? You want to know, and there's so much leading up, and then you get to reading about it, reading books, reading articles, watching videos, and you're just like, what happened?
And a lot of these people that just have gone missing, and you hear the phrase, they just vanished. It's like nothing. It's like they were there 1 second and then they're gone. There's enough here in this case to where there's something there. You know what I mean? It's not just they just went missing. There's something happened. We know enough to know something.
There was stuff left behind, and it was the 60s, so there wasn't a lot with DNA, and police work was, it's completely different with how science worked then, with how they tested stuff. And so that's probably one thing that left it, and everything's different. That was, like you said, 60 years ago. Yeah. So
DNA now is, if you're a serial killer in the 21st century, they scrape the fingernails of the victim and they're like, oh, it's a guy named Carl from San Francisco. They know exactly who it is within minutes. But back then, they're like, we have no idea.
Yeah, a room is covered in blood, and they're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's blood. That's all they know.
Yeah.
They might be able to tell you the type. I think that was the case.
So to get to that, we'll start early on. One of the first things that I ran across that seemed a little bit mysterious was the fire that killed her parents.
Yeah, and things that I read, I guess there were conflicting reports on she had been sexually assaulted. Now, some said that it was by a foster family after the fire, but then some maybe alluded to that it was her parents that were doing it.
Oh, really?
So
I didn't.
And that was because it was never really clear. It was just that she told a family member after the fire that she had been sexually assaulted. It didn't come out and say, it was her parents, but it didn't say, and the article didn't mention that it was a foster family, because some said that she went into foster care after the fire before she was adopted. But some were just she said that she had been assaulted.
Well,
so
she was never adopted. Her foster family was actually her maternal aunt.
Well, see, I read that she went into foster care before she went to her paternal family. She was adopted by family, went to be with her family. I read that she was in foster care at first before
yeah.
Immediately after the fire, they put her in foster care, and then she was adopted.
But to the fire, it was supposed to be, this was 1939, I think. So as far as forensic stuff goes, it was even, much poorer then. But I read that it was a mysterious fire. And then when you look into it, like her mother and father, her mother was found dead of smoke inhalation playing solitaire, and her father was found with the phone in his hand, which that's, I would think smoke inhalation is a slow death, and unless you're asleep, you try to get away from it.
Yeah, because if you know there's a fire, you're not going to be sitting there playing cards like, there's a fire, and then
I'll just keep playing cards, and you're choking to death, and you're like, I got an ace. So I think that may be one aspect of it that they thought was weird, that they died in that way. And they say they died of smoke inhalation, but again, it's the 30s.
And if there was a fire, like, there probably wasn't a lot of evidence left on the body. Maybe they couldn't tell if there had been any trauma to their bodies other than that.
And the dog had been, they found the dog downstairs in the basement wrapped up in a blanket, and someone said the dog had been put down before the fire. So they had a dog that didn't die in the fire but was dead. So they don't know who killed the dog, and the dog was supposed to be a really good guard dog. So, putting two and two together, maybe someone killed the dog first so it wouldn't alert the people. I don't know.
Yeah.
But again, I can't find out if there was a reason to kill her family. They were both, normal. Her father was a World War I vet. They lived kind of an upper middle class life. So, and Joan just happened to be with her grandmother that night. But then she was, at some point, moved into foster care.
And I didn't do much, dive into the fire as you did. I just went more after she was married and everything.
Yeah. Well, so once she went into foster care, at some point in foster care, she was sexually abused. She told only a few people about this. This is one of those things that came out after all of this happened. And a lot of the information I got in a book called A Kitchen Painted in Blood by Stephen Ahern, which is fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of information there. So if you enjoy this, A Kitchen Painted in Blood by Stephen Ahern, I would highly suggest that. But he said that she was not, she didn't tell a lot of people about that. That was something that I think at some point she told her husband. And then, we'll get to, but so she moved out her foster family, who again was her maternal aunt. She went to college in Pennsylvania, got a degree in English literature, and then started work in a publishing house in New York. She started in the secretarial pool, moved up to the head of the secretary pool, and then was, I think, a associate editor or something. And this was late 50s. So she went to a Harvard football game and met
Martin Risch.
And
they fell in love and went from there, got married, and they first lived in Connecticut, and then they had their daughter Lillian in, what year did they have her?
So I guess it was 57. I'm not sure, somewhere in there.
Yeah, and then 59 they had their son David, and then they moved to Lincoln, Massachusetts, which is outside of Boston.
Mm-hmm. They lived in another part of Massachusetts first, after Lillian was born, for a few years. And Joan was very active in the community. She was in the League of Women Voters. She had a lot of friends, but they moved closer to Martin's workplace in Lincoln, and they moved there in the spring of 1961. Joan had quit working by that point, was a stay-at-home mom, and from everything I read, she was fiercely devoted to her kids. I read some quotes, and people were almost like she was a little too much. She was probably a helicopter mom before that term was
a thing.
Yeah. So they lived there in Lincoln for about 6 months until October 24th, 1961. And that's where everything goes south.
Yeah.
Goes awry.
And that morning, so Martin gets up. He's got a business trip to get on. He has to catch an 8 a.m. flight, so he leaves the house about 6:30. Get the kids get up, and Joan cooks them breakfast. That morning, she takes her son across the street to the neighbor, Barbara Baker, and she and Lillian go to a dentist appointment in Bedford, which is about 8 miles away from where they live. So not a long drive.
Mm-hmm.
I know things were different, but when I GPS that, it was about a 14-minute drive, but it made me a little bit longer then. And she took their car, a 1951 Chevrolet, a blue one, for the appointment, and then they did a little shopping after. It says she paid in cash. They went back home. While they were gone, it says that milk and mail were delivered while they were gone, and that said that the milkman, postman, didn't say anything unusual, didn't see anything unusual.
So when she got back home, it was, I guess, around 10:50. Yeah. She picked up David. She had dropped David off at Barbara's house, her neighbor. Do you say her name?
Barbara Baker.
Barbara Baker, yeah. Or is it Barker?
Barker.
I think it is. Yeah, Barbara Barker. And then she took both kids back home. Presumably, she did some lunch, got some lunch for the kids. The dry cleaner came by about 11:15, picked up suits that belonged to Martin. They said that was normal for him to do that. Obviously, they weren't friends with him, but he had come so many times that he didn't really even knock. Maybe he knocked and walked in, but he came in, got the suits. I assume they were probably, he knew where they were going to be out hanging in the front.
Yeah, it's his usual thing that he did all the time.
But he said Joan was there and everything seemed fine. That was 11:15. By all accounts, Joan would put down David for a nap at noon. And there's no reason to believe that didn't happen.
Said she did it every time, and he would sleep until about 2, which he was lucky 2-year-old that sleeps 2 hours a day.
Yeah. Then the son of Barbara Barker's son came over to play. Douglas, thank you. Around 1:20. About 30 minutes after that, I've read a lot of places that at 1:55. Joan takes Lillian and the neighbor boy back to the Baker's house, Barker's house. I'm going to do that all day.
That's my bad for saying Baker first.
But the thing about that gets me is they also say she didn't tell Barbara.
Yeah, she just took them over there.
So did these two kids say, "Oh, Joan brought us over here at 1:55 p.m.?" No. So I don't know where this is. Yeah,
because the kids wouldn't have known.
Yeah, so I don't. But we have to assume sometime before 2, she brought the kids back over there. And she told her daughter, "I'll be back." Which, in the grand scheme of things, if nothing had happened that day, would not have been unusual. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a little weird that she didn't knock on the door until Barbara. I don't know. Again, in the grand scheme of things, I think they were the same age. And I think they just played it.
It said that they just played on the swing set and they couldn't see the Risch house from where they were swinging.
Well, I'll tell you something else I read that I didn't know this because, I'd read some things about it, had an image of, suburban Boston in the early 60s, a very Leave It to Beaver kind of houses next to each other, a road in the middle and the white picket fences. But this was a very wooded area. And the front of their houses, from the front of the Barker's house to the front of the Risch's house was about 100 yards. And they were both set off the road pretty well. So, and there were a lot of trees around, and the road was just barely wide enough for 2 cars. It was basically a 1-car road. So this wasn't that, at least what I was thinking.
Yeah.
But after that,
it says that Barbara saw Joan outside. Said it looked like she might have had a trench coat on. She was going up her driveway carrying something red, and her arms were outstretched from whatever she was carrying.
Now, I've read the police reports on that, and what Barker told is she was wearing her gray trench coat, which was normal,
Because it's October.
It's October. I looked it up, and they said it was probably I guess around this time in the low 50s, upper 40s. So putting on a jacket to go outside.
Because it said earlier that she changed into like a house dress and sneakers, so she wasn't like dressed just to...
Yeah. But she never said that she was carrying something red in her hand. She said there was something red in front of her, which at the time Barbara thought, with her hand stretched out in front of her, it looked like she was reaching for something, and she was, how your mind kind of makes an assumption and the dominoes fall. At that time, she's like, oh, David's up and running around, and she put him in a red sweater or something, and she's kind of walking fast to catch up to him. I think she even said something aloud. At this point, she knew the kids were in her backyard, and she said something aloud, and the kids said, like Lillian said, maybe she's chasing David or something. So that was the presumption at the time. But the police believed, and it's general knowledge or general consensus now is that was Joan. But again, it was 100 yards away through trees.
And that was probably the last time that anyone can confirm seeing her.
So at 2:15, about Barbara sees Joan outside. There was something else out there too, she thinks. Something red in front of her. I don't know
whether it was on her or she was carrying something. There was something, she saw something red.
Now I've read this in the book Blood in the Kitchen, that there was some more neighbors and there were 4 of them playing bridge. Did you get this? Did you come across this?
No.
I had not read this anywhere, but it's in the book and it's from police statements. 4 women were playing bridge around 2:30. They thought they heard something. 2 women said it sounded like a scream. One lady said she thought it was probably a cat, and one of the 4 said she wasn't sure if she heard anything. So I don't know what to think of that. In hindsight, my brain tells me they may have heard something.
Yeah, and it's like, were they told that Joan went missing and then asked?
Yeah.
And then they just like, well, I kind of thought I heard something. Or were they just said, hey, did you, there's something mysterious. And they're like, oh, yeah, we did hear this. I remember this.
That's a big part of it. That's going to come into play for me a couple more times. For instance, the next thing that happens in the timeline is around 2:45, there was a sighting of a woman on Route 2A, which was about 300 yards from the Risch's house, through some trees. But how long does it take you to go 300 yards? Like 2 or 3 minutes?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's a 3 football field, so just depending on how fast you walk.
So maybe 5 minutes, So that could have been, But then there was another sighting of a woman around 3:15 on Route 128.
Or weren't they working on Route 128? Like, wasn't that under construction at the time?
Right. There was some construction going on. That's about 5 miles away. Now, 5 miles is, most people can walk, I think, 3 or 4 miles an hour. I think 3 miles an hour. So you got to figure that's an hour and a half. If she was seen at 3:15, then that 2:15 sighting of her wasn't Joan. And of the 2, I think the 2:15 was Joan, which means we can kind of strike out that
because
3:15.
And then right after that is when one of the neighbors, Virginia King, gets off the bus and sees a car that she doesn't recognize in the driveway.
Right.
Now, some reports say that it was some have said it was a gray Oldsmobile. Some have said it was a 2-tone, possibly blue General Motors vehicle.
Yeah.
So it's just not consistent. She just said that she saw a car while she was getting off the bus. And then another neighbor said that they saw a car in either the Keens or the Risch's driveway, and the Keens were like, there was no car in our driveway.
Yeah,
So
the second sighting, it was pulling out. It was backing out into that relatively small road, and they had to wait for it. But that second sighting of Joan, possibly, I don't think it was, but that second sighting, again on Route 128, was at 3:30. That's an hour and 15 minutes. That's still, she would have had to run to get there. Now, she could have also, someone put her in a car and then she got out of it again. But the first time they saw her, she was walking north along that 128. And 128 was a 4-lane, it's the closest thing to an expressway they had in the 60s. It was a 4-lane for Boston, for a pretty big city. So, and she was walking in the median, which means she would have had to walk across 2 lanes of traffic. The first time she was going north, the second time south. So it doesn't seem, and back to what you said, this to me, if Joan hadn't gone missing and it wasn't a big deal, those people probably never would have reported seeing somebody. I think when news got out and people were like, have you seen anything? Oh, John, you remember I told you about seeing that lady on the road? And he's like, no, I don't remember you saying that.
Yeah.
I saw this lady. She supposedly had blood on her.
Down her legs.
Carrying something, or at least holding her stomach. I don't think it was Joan. The first one, she couldn't have been at her home at 2:15 and then walking down that expressway or the Route 128.
Yeah, because it says she took Lillian over there, 155 to Barbara's house. So even that, if she had to go back home, or even if she left from there at basically 2:00, getting to Route 128 by 3:15, that would make an hour and 15 minutes that she got 5 miles away.
Yeah, that's not. And then if that's the case, which I think neither one of us are saying that's the case, who did Barbara see at 2:15?
Yeah.
So I kind of discount at least one of those seen on 128. And I also hear people say, well, if it wasn't Joan, who was it? And why didn't they help them? Well, I think the why didn't they help them is they were doing whatever speed late 50s, early 60s cars were doing, 50, 60
and like we
miles
said,
an
there
hour.
was construction going on in that area.
So I think that was a state park. Like that housing, that land was at the time part of a state park, and it is now. The part you can't even go there to the house anymore, or to the area. It's
the house isn't even there anymore.
Yeah, but that old Bedford Road is where they lived. That's part of a state park that people can't go to anymore. But so yeah, all of those things are going on, but we really haven't talked about more the key. We're saying people saw Joan, and the reason that's weird is when Barbara had to go do some things. She took the 2 kids back across the street. She dropped off Lillian around 3:45 p.m. And it's presumed that Lillian went in the house.
Because she just thought Joan was there.
Right. She came back around 4:15, so Lillian had been at her home
for about 30
minutes. And Lillian comes out and says, Mommy's not there. My mother's gone. So they went in to look, and there was a kitchen covered in blood.
Yeah.
And I read, too, that at the end of it all, when they gathered up the blood, and the forensic people said it was about half a pint to a pint of blood, which is not enough. That in and of itself isn't fatal. And they said that there are a handful of reasons someone could bleed that much. A head wound can bleed a lot without being fatal. So, but no one knows exactly what happened. Obviously, that's the crux of it, is what happened between 2:15, when that's the last verified sighting, and 3:45, when Barbara walked into the kitchen. What happened? And I guess that's kind of that's the mystery.
Yeah.
Because
they said that there was just the blood, but there were smears of it all over the kitchen. Looked like somebody had to clean it up. Even in the pictures they've taken, you can see there's paper towels on the ground. You can see where somebody tried to clean it up.
And oddly, those pictures I thought it was paper towels for the longest time, but it's drawing paper. She kept a roll of drawing paper in the house for the kids. So it looks exactly like toilet paper, paper towels. But
it still looks like that's what was used.
But something was
trying
used,
to clean it
and
up.
there was bloody children's clothes. Obviously, David's, like a pair of David's overalls that was there too, and it looked like someone tried to clean it up.
It was probably just maybe something that he wore that morning.
Yeah. That
she took off of him while it was chilly. Once they were inside.
The trash can had been pulled out from under the cabinet, under the sink, and was setting closer to the middle of the floor. the phone had been ripped off the wall, and the phone had been placed on top of the trash can. And the police reports say it was placed there. It wasn't thrown away. Like somebody did just throw it in the thing and walk away. It was kind of balanced. Like someone set it on top of there. Also in the trash can were a couple of empty bottles of whiskey and some beer bottles, which Martin would later say he and Joan finished off a bottle of whiskey the night before, but he wasn't sure about the second bottle of whiskey or the beer can, or the beer bottles.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a telephone book, and these aren't I think it was a telephone book where you turned to it and you wrote in your own numbers for emergency contacts.
Yeah, it says it was open to where you would write your emergency contacts, but there was nothing there.
Yeah. So the police were called. The officer at the scene thought it was a suicide when he came in. Mike McHugh. And the Lincoln PD consisted of 9 officers. 4 of them were full-time. So it was a really small police department. But his first thought was it was a suicide. I don't know why he thought that someone would bleed all over their kitchen and then not die there.
Yeah, it's like, how do you kind of need a body. You would think with all the blood, if you're seeing that blood right off, it's a suicide, so you're thinking you're going to find her laying somewhere in the house.
In that area, though.
Yeah,
exactly. But he went and looked through the house, in which Barbara and a neighbor named Jane had gone through the house and looked.
Because they found David in his crib crying and needing his diaper changed. So that's when they called the cops.
So they couldn't find Joan. The police couldn't find him. He, looked around a little bit and realized this is more than what I thought. And he called the chief of police, Leo Alger, I think his name was.
Aljo.
And said, this is all hands on deck. We need to get everybody out here. Something's up. So one of the things I found fascinating that happened after this is they called in dogs to search. And I know the first dog, and I assume later when they had more dogs, that first dog, they gave her something to smell. She went across the street to the Barker's house, but that is to be expected.
She's been back and forth multiple times
twice
with Lillian.
this morning, right? But short of that, however they do these dogs, like don't follow that lead. What else you got for me? The dog went out to the driveway and stopped. So,
like maybe she got into a vehicle.
That's got to be it. Yeah, she was put in or got in a vehicle in her own driveway because the dogs couldn't find a trace of her, and they took her around the back of the house, and the dogs never gained.
Yeah, because her vehicle was still there, right?
Yeah. Her vehicle had a couple of drops of blood on the hood. There were drops of blood in the master bedroom, which was upstairs, and drops of blood in David's room, and a couple of drops on the stairs. So whatever happened in the kitchen, more than likely what happened in the kitchen was followed up with someone walking up the stairs. It was whoever had bled that much had either they had staunched it really well, or it was someone that had blood on them.
Well, do you think that something happened and it was just trickle of blood in the other places, and then you said that they were on the stairs, like she went downstairs, and then maybe a lot of blood loss happened later? Or do you think a lot of blood loss happened at first and then it tapered off, and that's when you find the droplets? What do you
well, this goes to my theory, which we'll probably hold off on, but I think the first blood, if you will, was in the kitchen.
Okay.
Yeah. What do you think?
I mean, with my theory, I don't know, because honestly, while I'm sitting here just kind of going over stuff in my head, I was like, oh, I wonder. With the one theory that I've read about, I want to go with everything started in the kitchen as well. And
just to let you know, we try not to talk too much about the case before we sit down and talk about it right here. So I think that leads to some good discussion. So that's what we're saying. We haven't talked about this. That the manhunt for her turned into the biggest civilian manhunt in New England history up to that point. It was massive. There was an Air Force base nearby. They had airmen from that Air Force base come. Martin Risch, his company that he worked for, loaned them their helicopter. And the helicopter, along with a state police helicopter, so they had 2 helicopters in the air. There was a reservoir nearby and some ponds and stuff like that. There were hundreds of divers that went into these bodies of water and looked for her. It turned from something happened, we'll find her, to we don't know where she's at. And to me, that's the crux of it, is there was enough. I mean, there was blood evidence, there were the dogs, there were the maybe sightings, there was a very specific time frame. We know at this point she was here and at this point she was going. And it's not wide. It's like an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. 2:15 to 3:45.
This is like, what could have happened to her in that short of time? Yeah. That blood loss, and then she's just, after that, there's nothing.
Right. She is absolutely gone. That was 60 years ago, and they've not found anything, But some of the main suspect the police thought of at the time was her husband.
Well, I mean, they always go to the husband. But, I mean, he was gone. He was on a business trip.
He was in New York, and she had been seen on the plane. They looked at the itinerary or whatever. Not the itinerary, the passenger list. It's called something. I'm drawing a blank. They looked at that. He wasn't lying. He was on the plane. They showed where he checked into the hotel, and he was there. Now, they still thought, well, that could be very convenient. Maybe he hired someone to do this. But by all accounts,
he was very loving. I mean, he spoke, whenever he spoke about her, like after the case, like he never really spoke about it again. He's like, I hope. He said what he hoped, and then that was it. He always spoke like very lovingly about her. And from what everybody said, like they didn't have any problems. He seemed to be a very loving and devoted husband and father. I mean, it wasn't like Joan was telling people, hey, he's mean or anything. There was nothing like that. There was no reason to think that he was doing something to where people would think he did this to Joan.
And he never married. He stayed in the house until they ran him off.
Didn't change the number just in case she called.
His perception, his theory, for lack of a better word, is understandable that he thought something happened, she fell, she got amnesia, and she'll remember. Mm-hmm. One day she'll remember and come back. And he went to his grave thinking that. I think he died in like 2009. But, so he was kind of wiped off their list after that. They didn't think he had much to do with it. Which, on the surface, I would have to agree. Like, I heard one time somebody was starting a podcast called The Husband Didn't Do It, but it would only be 4 episodes. Yeah. But this feels like, I don't think Martin had any hand in this.
Yeah, because, I mean, David was little enough, like he was too. But if Lillian had saw her father at any point, she would have said, well, I saw Daddy.
Well, yeah, but I think he was gone.
Yeah.
I mean, we know he wasn't there, but they're like hiring someone. But,
4-year-olds, they're brutally honest. If they see something, they're going to say exactly what they saw because they don't know they're supposed to keep stuff secret.
Yeah.
Because even if they said, somebody said, oh, you don't tell, and I'm like, well, that person, some children are going to say, that person said don't tell. Well, who?
Yeah. And from what I understand, they actually did interrogate, for lack of a better word, I say that a lot, Lillian with a child psychologist, and she didn't, everything that she said kind of fell in line with what they had already known. One thing I was curious about, she was in that house for about 30 minutes by herself. And I wonder if she had blood on her when they got there,
and maybe if the droplets were from her, maybe she stepped.
And she tried to clean it up, maybe that she tried to clean it up.
And
because
she
if
probably
you look at the pictures, it was not a good job.
Yeah.
It's more smeared.
And maybe, she walked up to, because it was in David's room, because she probably heard him crying, but she's not big enough to lift a 2-year-old out of a crib and do anything. So she probably went and talked to him.
Yeah.
and then maybe heard the car, because even if maybe she's heard the car or saw the car, maybe she was sitting outside waiting to see a car, seeing if Barbara to come back.
I couldn't find out, but I'd be curious to know what condition Lillian was in when Barbara got back. I have to believe she didn't have a lot of blood on her. I think that would have been stated.
Lillian was 4 years old and 61, so she's, 60?
Yeah, so...
something now?
Yeah.
But, wondering what she can remember.
She's 65, 64, 65. From what I gather, they never got more information from the kids. Obviously not David, but one of my thoughts is maybe the person that cleaned it up was Lillian, because she thought, oh, Mommy would like me to clean this up. But they also
because she doesn't know what it is.
Yeah.
She doesn't know that it's blood. Yeah. She's 4.
Yeah. I know there was some of the things I saw. She told Barbara, Mommy's gone and there's red paint in the kitchen. But that wasn't... That's
just kind of something that's been...
Yeah. But at least that's not what was in the official police reports. Maybe Barbara said that to other people. But they also said there was no footprints in the blood, no tracking, which in and of itself is kind of weird. Whoever did this didn't leave any tracks. They did leave 2 fingerprints and a half palm print that were checked and didn't match Joan or anyone. They didn't match, Martin or anyone. So there was a third party at the site, because the fingerprints were in the blood. So it's not like they were fingerprints from friends of theirs, that had come over earlier. These were in the blood. So someone was there that wasn't Joan during this altercation. And everyone they thought, might have something to do with this, checked their fingerprints, and they didn't. It wasn't those fingerprints. Which, that to me is very, very strange.
Well, it says, one thing I read, it said that there was someone that the neighbors had suggested, this Robert Foster.
Right. Yeah, they checked him. This guy was buying, he worked for the national park and was going to these people and saying, the national park owns this land. We're going to eventually buy your house. I think he was, not trying to shake them down, but trying to get the best price out of them. He knew the longer they stayed, the more that the state was going to, or the federal government was going to have to pay. So, and they said he was kind of pushy, as kind of a jerk. So they looked at him, but he had been with another coworker that day. He was with someone, and they checked his fingerprints, and it wasn't those. But he was one of the suspects early on. They also, when they went outside, found on the hood of her car, in addition to a couple of drops of blood, they found a coat hanger. Just a single coat hanger on the hood of her car. I don't know. They did have someone come earlier that morning that gets suits. I don't know if that guy left it there by mistake, if Joan was carrying something and laid it down. I don't know where that came from, what it means, anything. So
after that, everybody's trying to figure out what's going on, and that was, a reporter, Serene Gerson, the reporter with the Fence Viewer, to go to the library to kind of look up similar cases.
And this was like a year later. Yeah.
So they go and they look at these, trying to find similar cases, and realize that all these cases, they're looking at these books that are similar to Joan's case. Joan has checked out all these books within the year before her disappearance. So
yeah, like 3 weeks.
Yeah, there was a book about Brigham Young's 27th wife who disappeared mysteriously. A book called Into Thin Air about a woman who left blood smears and all this and went missing. And then 2 other books. I think it was a list of 25 books.
Yeah, but there was a lot of books.
The other one, there was one called The Hunt for Richard Thorpe, which is about a little boy who went missing, and then Death of the Heart. And said that they looked through it, and it was over the summer of 61, 25 books that had to do with murders and missing persons it was just really similar.
Yeah.
So they were like, did she, stage this? Did she... And they said it was, I know you said 1 to 2 pints. One thing said it was half a pint. That's not a lot of blood. She could have purposely cut something like on her leg and bled that, or, who knows? And did she stage this? Was there something going on? And her husband said, no, she was just really into that stuff. She
that's
was
what I read
really
too,
into true crime stuff.
Her husband said that was not uncommon.
He said, he wasn't shocked by that. And he said that was just something she was into. She thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
But it was just that the books also had to do with the person who went missing, or person, especially the one that said that there was blood smears and a towel and all this. And that's exactly what happened with her. Like, what, did she do something, or did somebody know that she checked out those books and do it to make it look like she did it? Like, did they know about her fascination with true crime? And
yeah. Well, I think looking in hindsight, it may be one of those weird coincidence.
Yeah, because if I go missing or something and somebody looks at my search results and looks at my research I've been doing lately, just missing people, they're going to be like, I think she did it herself.
But the chief of police called it the biggest break in the case in the last year. They had gotten a dead end, and it really reinvigorated the case, which that in itself is good. But again, and I think they talked to a crime scene expert, a guy named Mark Safaric, today, like in the 21st century, like in 2015, I think. He was asked about the case. No, it was 2019. So it was very recently, and everything was old, and all he could do was look at pictures. And you can find pictures of that kitchen easily online.
And we'll have it on our social media.
But he said that doesn't look staged. He said it was just like the trash can in the middle of the floor. Why would you do that if you were trying to stage it? That doesn't. He's like, this doesn't make any sense. Wouldn't
want, unless. I guess you could look at it both ways, though. But he's just like, you want to make sure they find this, or like, I'm going to put this so they look. But they're always going to feel like they're always going to check the trash can. You're going to check everything like that.
So he said he didn't think it was staged. It doesn't look staged to him. And again, Martin said that was not odd. Joan liked that kind of stuff. And she was also a writer. Her degree was in English Lit, and she read a lot, but she was a writer. And you would do that. If you're doing research for something, you're going to get a lot of books that have to do that. Maybe that's something she was just into at the time. Did it mean anything? I don't know. I don't think so. I think the thing you just said, did someone else realize what she was doing and took advantage of that? I hadn't thought about that. That's a good idea. I did read a theory that whoever mysteriously killed her parents found out that Joan was renting these books from the library because Joan was interested in who killed her parents mysteriously, and that same group of people killed her. But that
is a deep theory. Like that's having to keep track of somebody for what, 30 years?
Yeah, almost 30, 25 years. But I don't think that happened. I just remember that's one of those theories that sounds cool. Whoever killed her parents killed her because she was getting too close. But the search went on for years. 4 years. I guess technically it's Middlesex County. If you have information, you can still call them. It's still an open case. I don't know if she's ever been declared dead. I don't think her husband
didn't have her. He wouldn't have her declared dead because he just believed that she had some sort of amnesia, and that's why he never moved. He didn't change their number, like we said. He stayed there just in case, and he died in 2009. And I think one of the investigators, the chief, he also died in 2009. So now you kind of talk about your theory.
Yeah. So here's what I think happened. There was a daughter born to her foster parents, the Natris, Alice, and
Frank.
Had a daughter. She was around 14, I think, 13, 14 at this time. And Alice had left Frank. He was living in New Rochelle, New York, and she was living in somewhere in California, I think LA. And Frank was trying to get them to come back. And Joan told Alice what happened to her at the hands of Frank. And she said, don't don't go back. Because Joan, I'm sorry, the little Evelyn is the daughter's name. Evelyn's about that age, and she's going to be in danger.
So Joan was saying that Frank is the one who assaulted her.
Yes, yeah. So she said, don't go back to him. And
because she was afraid for Evelyn.
This was like the second person maybe she had told. I think some of her friends kind of knew about it from college, but she hadn't told the family. And she told that. Frank, by all accounts, her paternal aunt knew Frank. Frank's brother obviously knew him. A couple of people, they said he was a very demanding, controlling kind of guy. He was lazy. Joan got some inheritance when her parents died, but Frank and Frank's sister Grace spent it. She never got any of that because he didn't work. He was he wanted to be in the music industry in the early 60s, and Joan's paternal aunt, Florence Bard, said it was stupid hillbilly junk. So I guess she was trying to get into rock and roll or something. But that didn't take. But he was a jerk. That's the general consensus. He was a controlling asshole. And he thought maybe Alice was going to come back with Evelyn, and he could go back to being controlling her, maybe have a young daughter there that would serve some purpose. Right.
Old habits.
But Alice found out, and while she defended him, she said, "Oh, he was this," or whatever bullcrap she came up with. She defended him. She still asked him about it. She brought it up to him. Did this really happen? And he denied it, but it still gave her pause. And I think he was the one that got angry about this. Joan was screwing up what could have otherwise been a fairly nice life. He was poor. He didn't have anything. He was living by himself. He didn't have anybody to control. And he had a son who was younger than Joan named Ben. And they said Ben would probably have done whatever his dad said. Mm-hmm. Frank or Ben's prints did not match the ones at that scene. But he's the only person I can think of that would have had something against her. And I think that's what it was. I think someone came in that house, hurt Joan, and then took her. And I think for whatever reason, he just lucked into, if that's the right phrase, a place to put her body where it would never be found. I don't know how. I mean, I can't understand. I have to imagine that area, Lincoln, Massachusetts, outside of the park area, is expanded by leaps and bounds. It's got to be. They've had to dig stuff up, and they've never found her. Maybe
they said they've found bodies and bones, but that none of them have been her.
Yeah, I can imagine if he did. It's somewhere in that state park or the national park that's undisturbed. And that's the other thing about this that gets me is she was never found. Still today, she's never been found. So whoever, I think, did violence against her found some way to hide the body by luck, or they knew something. So my theory is her uncle Frank had something to do with it, because he was about to lose control of his family, and allegations of
sexual abuse.
Yeah, was going to get out. So, what about you?
Well, the theory I had kind of thought about with the blood and the suspicious car, and I even saw someone talk about it on Reddit, and this was years ago when I first read about the case, and I saw a Reddit thread, and I read this, and I was like, well, that kind of goes with what I think, is that, even though it says that Joan was super happy being a stay-at-home mom, she did talk about going back to teaching. She had, a 4-year-old. 2 years later, she had David, so she's got, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Lillian's probably getting ready to start school soon, so she's just going to have one kid. Is that she had an illegal abortion at home. She found out she was pregnant, and she was just, I've got 2 kids. I'm happy. It's easy. 2 kids is easy. Going from 2 to 3, especially when your husband's probably gone all the time, and that era, just, I mean, that's what most women did, was take care of their kids. But the suspicious car, a lot of blood in the kitchen, and then sightings of a woman with blood running down her legs, is that she had an abortion, and, an illegal abortion at home. Doctor or some, person came in that car, gave her the abortion, left, or maybe she, and then with a lot of blood loss like that, because you never really know what's going to happen, there could be a lot of blood loss. And obviously there was blood somehow, there was anywhere from a half a pint to 2 pints of blood loss. Maybe she lost a lot of blood. She was really disoriented, or just the thought that she just aborted a child. You just kind of have to break. You don't, you think you're going to be okay with something like that. Then it happens. You see all the blood. You think about what you've done. You break. And that's when she, Lillian was gone. David was asleep. She snapped and just got into this car with this person. Like, freaked out, got in the car with them, and they, like, pushed her out. And they were like, I'll take you here, and then I'm going to get you out. Maybe they took her to the bridge, because was it the Route 128? There was construction, like the road construction. So there's theory that she was disoriented. She was blood loss. She was, you have a lot of blood loss. Even if it's just a little cut, you're kind of like, all that blood. She's walking. She doesn't know where she is. She falls into this construction, and they're like doing construction on this road. And then her body is underneath all this concrete. Like they're building the road. They don't, she's fallen in there, something happens, and they're just putting concrete or whatever they're building on top. And there's theory that she's in there, like she's underneath Route 128 while the construction was going on.
Yeah, I've read that. Here's my problem with that is if you think that's what happened, then Joan's day was 7 o'clock, get up, get Martin out the door, 9:30 dentist appointment, noon feed the kids, 2 o'clock illegal abortion, 3 o'clock dinner. That, to me, that doesn't. If she took those kids over there just before 2, knowing David was going to wake up at 2, she was leaving herself no window. And also, anybody could have come over there. I mean, her daughter could have come back. Barbara could have brought things back.
Yeah.
So it just, and the phone was ripped out of the wall. That's a sign of violence. She was trying to get help, and whoever did this to her.
And I think with some of it, it's just that she maybe, and then this was just, and it's not necessarily the theory that I agree with. It's just a theory that I think sounds good, because maybe, it was illegal. So if something happened and she freaked out, and this person who just gave her an abortion is like, shit, she's gonna tell on me, and I'm gonna get in trouble. And they ripped the phone out, and they were like, no. And they put her in the car, because they're like, this woman's gonna tell on me, and I can't let this get out, because maybe they were a legitimate doctor with a license, if that's
or
something
not.
happened.
That's another thing too. I know a lot of people who did that back then weren't doctors, and they would have gotten in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Either way, if they were licensed or not, they were going to be in a lot of trouble if that was something that happened with the violence.
She had been there for 6 months. How do you find someone in her lifestyle? Joan wasn't part of this underground. She really didn't have connections at all, much less underground connections to people that would be doing something that was highly illegal at the time.
And like I said, it's not necessarily the one I agree with. I guess it's just the one that I find interesting.
And I think that's why it's gained some traction. Is it serves the purpose of making Joan a martyr and a hero, because people look at it and go, she had bodily autonomy in 1961. She was fighting the system even then. So it gets her that, but it also introduces an air of scandal. So it kind of covers all the bases, and it seems like the best.
And it's one that gets it talked about, because that is one that I see a lot of.
Yeah. But to me, it's because it's got the scandal attached to it. And it's like, oh, that's a good one. But it's, I think it kind of falls apart if you start. Like, I just don't see the Joan Risch that we have been told existed was getting an illegal abortion at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, And if she wanted one, why didn't she? Her husband was going to be gone that night. Somebody comes to her house after the kids are in bed, when the neighbors can't see a weird car, has the procedure, and then is able to sleep, I mean,
and I see that too. It's just, I guess you think as some people get in their mind, it's like, okay, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to have the abortion, then I'm going to go about my day because it's nothing to think about. And I guess if you're trying to compartmentalize something like that, if that were the case, you try to say, I'm going to do this, have the abortion, then I'm going to get David up for a nap and let them go about my day. You don't, because you don't really know what's going to happen. They're going to say, I'm going to do this, and then...
I can see that. Yeah, if you're trying to not think about it.
But I still just find it crazy that with all that, well, no matter what happened to her, where is she?
That's the one. That's what gets me is, I think she died relatively soon after that day. I think she was gone by the end of the day. Whoever took her, again, I think it had something to do with Frank Natras. I just do. Maybe he wanted it. That's it. Just get her out of the picture. I can't find anything that says he was that type of person. You know, he was a controlling jerk, but most people even...
He was probably too lazy to go and do that and hurt her.
So.
And maybe what happened is that she cut herself and got dizzy and wandered off.
Well, the dogs couldn't find anything.
Yeah,
looks like she got into a car. So somebody took her.
Yeah, I think because she wouldn't have gotten to a car unless she was disoriented. Like, she wouldn't have got willingly into a car and left her 2-year-old son.
Exactly.
Because she got, she put Lily in, with Barbara. But she wouldn't have willingly left her 2-year-old son asleep in the crib.
So I think she was hurt. Someone, did an act of violence against her. She was hurt. She was forced to leave against her will. She died somewhere. The body was miraculously put in an area that they've still not found her. And the question is, who would perform violence on her? Was it just a random person? That seems really weird.
Because they lived in the really secluded area, but I think, people would notice a car. Like you said, the Keens, they noticed a car that Virginia noticed that car that wasn't...
Did you know they probably found that car? Have you heard this? Someone called a reporter like 6 weeks later, an anonymous tip to this reporter, and said, I've been sitting on this a while. I probably shouldn't have. I feel bad about it. It was this kind of car. It had Massachusetts plates that had, I don't know, FD9 on it. That's all I can tell you. So he went to the cops, this reporter did, said, I got this tip. They looked up the type of car it could have been. I think it was like, based on descriptions, they said, well, it's a 1958 to 1961. I don't know. This kind of car, ran it, looked at all the numbers. They did get a match. They went to a guy in Medford, Massachusetts, asked him about it. And he's like, yeah, the car was stolen. And he had reported it stolen.
And Bedford was where they had the dentist appointment, right?
Yeah, but this was Medford.
Oh, Medford.
I don't know. Same, could have been. He reported it stolen. It was stolen on the 24th of October. And they eventually found the car, which they're pretty sure was the car. But there was no evidence in it. So someone had time to clean it. The weak point of that is that anonymous source. Mm-hmm. It could have been that this guy's
guilty.
Found something, like his enemy, somebody that he didn't like, stole a car and went joyriding, and he's like, oh, I'm going to call the police and the cops or a reporter and say that that's the car that was in that Joan Risch thing. Mm-hmm. So we don't even know if it's the same car that's associated, because the source was anonymous. They still don't know. But they found the car. They think they found that car, but there was no evidence of blood. But it was 6 weeks later. People had time to clean it. I think today that would have been a huge get for the police department. They could have found something, but again, 60 years ago,
they did what they could.
Yeah, they did what they could.
They really did.
Found nothing and returned it to the guy. And they also, what was weird is the cops came in, looked around, took some kind of blood samples, whatever they were doing at the time, and said, okay, thanks. And Martin said, when can I clean this? Oh, you can do it now. I mean, within days. And some people from the neighborhood came in and cleaned it. Martin couldn't do it. He wound up staying with some friends for a couple of days. So, but that's it. I think I can't think of anything more that we should talk about.
Just we'll have I mean, like I said, this is an open case. What's the police department?
Lincoln Police Department,
and
Middlesex County, Massachusetts.
We'll put the number for that in the show notes, just in case somebody randomly has any information. You have anything, you know anything, you saw anything, you are Joan Risch out there somehow still alive, like with amnesia, and you're listening to True Crime Podcast.
Yeah, we know you liked it at one point. You were into true crime.
Because, I mean, that's what Martin thought. That's what he believed, because he didn't want to believe she was dead. So we'll put that in the show notes, information, and we'll have pictures on our social media of Joan and pictures of the crime scene. So,
all right.
And we'll be back with another episode.
Join us next time, and we'll try to do better. Thank you.